Hello guys and welcome back. Yeah, no, I always seem to take some pretty long breaks when making videos, but this is a video that I've actually been sitting on for a while. Now, I've covered a lot of content related to Catch a Predator, and while I've always praised the work done by Chris, by PJ, and whatever law enforcement agency they're working with, I wanted to take a look at the investigation that changed everything, and not for the better. I'm talking about the Murphy, Texas sting. Prior to this, TCAP had already developed a mostly foolproof system that began with the Riverside sting. NBC would throw a dart at the map of the US, they would contact the local police, the mayor, and any other officials to properly set up a sting. And once they got approval on all ends, the chats were opened, goons were arrested, and memes were born. But as time went on, there were growing concerns that the show was less concerned with spreading a message about protecting children and was more about ratings, about making good TV rather than actually doing good for the community. Well, let's just say that the Murphy sting did absolutely nothing to quiet the naysayers. Unlike before, where Chris and the crew made sure to dot their I's and cross their T's, here, they literally cut every corner possible to get the sting operation on the ground. That included the city manager, Craig Sherwood, approving the operation without letting the mayor or the city council know. Yeah, because why would the mayor need to know about a predator sting going on in his own city? They also didn't bother to do any recon as to where the sting house was located. You'll remember the footage of angry neighbors protesting outside the sting house, not wanting predators to be brought to their city? Well, their complaints weren't entirely unjustified. One thing that Chris and many fans of TCAP never seem to mention is that the sting house was actually 2 blocks away from an elementary school with small children. Spoiler alert, there's quite a few people who will end up losing their jobs by the time the story is over. But I can only hope that the morons who rented this house were also somewhere on that list. And the cherry on top was the piss poor police work. In previous investigations, the police always had their own parallel investigation going on. That way, when they went to the DA, they could show that they did all the work necessary to have a strong case against these men. The Murphy, Texas sting had literally none of that. Here, the police relied on PJ to do all the detective work. There was no parallel investigation here. All the evidence came directly from PJ, not the police. So, what the hell did the police actually do in this sting? Well, they arrested the guys who showed up, and then they would try to figure out what they did. Look, I'm not a cop, but I'm pretty sure that's not how proper police work is done. I'm not defending these guys, but that's pretty much the equivalent of a cop saying, "You're under arrest." What are you under arrest for? Something those guys said you did. Anyway, we'll figure it out later. This wasn't helped by the fact that the chief of police later admitted that the arresting officers hadn't read or seen all the chat logs before making the arrests.
Did your arresting officers, did they see the chats before they made the arrest?
In some cases, yes.
Did they see the entire chats?
Making it impossible, says District Attorney Roach.
To say this sting was a shit show will be putting it mildly. You had a sting house that was literally 2 blocks away from a school. You had an entire operation that was not fully authorized. You had an online vigilante group doing the actual detective work. And you had an entire police department whose sole priority was looking cool while they threw predators to the ground. I would talk about the guys who showed up in this sting, but aside from Stanley Kendall and, this guy, they're all pretty unremarkable. The only one that anyone ever seems to talk about is the one that many would claim ended up killing the show. I'm of course talking about Lewis Conradt Jr. Conrad was an assistant DA in a neighboring county. During the sting operation, he began chatting and talking to someone he believed to be a 13-year-old boy. Conrad gave the boy a pseudonym and a fake identity. But after some looking into, PJ was able to properly identify him. Once they realized who he was, they knew that this was the catch of a lifetime, and they pulled out everything in their bag of tricks again to show up to the sting house. But nothing worked. So instead of reporting their findings to Conrad's county and letting the authorities know what he was up to, they decided to go to him. And the shit show only continued as the warrant to search Conrad's house was riddled with numerous errors courtesy of a sleep-deprived officer. When they arrived at the house, they tried to get him to come to the door peacefully, and when that didn't work, They literally sent in an entire SWAT team, to which I don't know what the thought process was behind that. But this is the moment where everything changed. Once inside, the SWAT team found Conrad with a gun in his hand. His last words were apparently, "I don't want to hurt anyone." To which afterwards, he aimed the gun at himself and pulled the trigger. They rushed him to the hospital, where he died shortly after arriving. One of my favorite shows of all time is Chernobyl, a show about the cause and aftermath of the explosion that took place in, well, Chernobyl. Once the reactor blows sky high, an incident that changes the lives of everyone around them, the show splits off into different viewpoints. Some people want the truth, some people are outraged, and some people are willing to throw others under the bus just so they don't have to take accountability. Well, let's just say that this was TCAP's Chernobyl moment. Once Conrad died, the narratives from the people involved started twisting. NBC and Chris Hansen will say they had little involvement over what happened, despite their equipment being used to surveil Conrad's house. The chief of police would lie and say that Chris and NBC were nowhere near the house and provided no information, with all the information coming from his officers, despite the fact that Chris was literally at the house.
Most of the time that we were down there, Chris Hansen was down the street from us standing by a car.
But Dateline's cameraman, producer, and Hansen can all be seen on the footage in front of the suspect's house with the police.
And Chris was the one who provided the police with Conrad's phone number.
And how'd you get his phone number?
Probably from the local department.
You didn't get his phone number from Chris Hansen?
Well, I didn't get his phone number from Chris Hansen.
But look again at NBC's outtakes.
972-524.
Perverted Justice would try to say that the reason they were in a rush to arrest Conrad was because they believed he was deleting evidence off his PC. Look, as someone who knows a thing or two about PCs, I can tell you that unless you burn your hard drive to ashes or you pulverize your disks to dust, almost everything is recoverable. It also doesn't help that by TCAP's own admission, and the admission of those involved, that Conrad didn't even need to show up to the house to get arrested. The crime had already been committed. Anything they would have found would have just been a little cherry on top. And it doesn't help that even if they did find anything incriminating against him, it would have most likely been thrown out of court, regardless of how damning it was. Remember that search warrant I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that when your warrant isn't 110% free of errors, bad things tend to happen. And that warrant just happened to have the wrong date, the wrong county, and several other errors that all but ensured that nothing found at his home could be used against him. So in short, all of this, completely unnecessary. Side note, I wasn't sure if I wanted to include this in the video, mainly because I try to keep these videos as accurate as I can, and I don't want to say something that may or may not be entirely accurate. But I think it's important to discuss this either way. According to the news stories that broke shortly after Conrad's unaliving, it was said that he possessed CP on his cell phone as well as on his computers. When trying to verify this, I stumbled onto an Esquire article written by Luke Dietrich. In it, he covers the entire controversy from top to bottom. But what's interesting is that, according to Dietrich, a forensic analysis was done on Conrad's laptop, the same one that he used to communicate with the decoy. And according to that analysis, there were no traces of any illegal material or anything that could be classified as CP anywhere. This put me at a bit of a crossroads. It just begs the question, who is telling the truth here? It's at this point that John Roach comes into the story. Well, he was always kind of there, but it's here where he gets to shine. John Roach was Collin County's prosecutor and the man that some see as the villain of this story. When John Roach was informed by Murphy's chief of police about the possibility of working with Dateline, Roach advised him against it, telling him that they were in the law enforcement business, not show business. And let's just say that John Roach wasn't exactly happy when the police went against his wishes and did the sting anyway. Once John Roach did his own digging into the matter, he ended up dropping the cases against every man who was caught in the sting. The main reason behind that boiled down to how bad the police work was. The police hardly did anything aside from putting these guys in handcuffs. And on top of that, They couldn't give him a clear answer as to whether or not they did anything to justify the arrests.
If you want to entertain, that's okay. But you got to get the police work done first. That's what's important.
Get on the ground.
The idea is to catch these guys and convict them under lawful, legal, admissible evidence. And it's the police department's responsibility to bring us that evidence. They're the investigative agency.
So they really dropped the ball here
Yes, they did.
by going into business, essentially, with the NBC and Perverted
That's
Justice.
exactly right. By giving up their role as professional law enforcement officers for a few minutes of TV time.
It's at this point that I want everyone listening to look at the situation from the point of view of a prosecutor. You've been handed a large stack of cases about men caught in a police sting. The men involved were all trying to do the worst thing you could do to a child. But when it comes time to look at the work done to justify pressing charges, you discover that every bit of evidence didn't come from the police. It came from an online vigilante group made up of citizens. And you discover that the police couldn't be bothered to even build their own cases against these men. They had to rely on civilians to do the job that they were trained to do. What do? Do you go along with what the public wants because that'll make for a better story? Or do you follow the rule of law? Perhaps things may have been different had the police actually done their own investigation and collected their own evidence, but the simple fact is, they didn't. The truth is, the investigation should start before you arrest someone, not after. John Roach did catch a lot of flack from his decision to let potential predators go, and a lot of it came from Perverted Justice. They called John Roach weak, among a few other things. I've shown a small bit of support for PJ in my videos, but I feel like I have to mention that they've done some pretty shady things. For example, there was a case where at least 2 potential predators were set free because of their own inaction. In the Fort Myers sting, PJ was ordered by the court to hand over one of their hard drives. And let's just say that they weren't exactly in a rush to do so. They stalled, made excuses, until they eventually told the court that, hey, you know that hard drive you wanted us to hand over? Well, the minute we were about to give it to you, it suddenly fizzle fried and it doesn't work anymore. Take that as you will. Eventually, Conrad's sister Patricia got involved, trying to find justice for her brother. And she did this by suing NBC for over $100 million. When asked why she chose to go after NBC rather than the Murphy police, Patricia claimed that if you were to look at the outtakes from the day her brother died, then you would see who was really in control of that situation. And from her perspective, it wasn't the police.
Why sue them? Why not sue the police departments?
Well, but when you look at the outtakes, I think you look at who is in charge. It did not seem to be the law enforcement people. And my whole point in pursuing this is that these type of vigilante, out of control, reality, and it's not even reality. Yeah, it is perverted justice. It wasn't justice.
Patricia eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, and the consequences only continued to pile on. Craig Sherwood, the city manager who approved the operation without telling anyone, was eventually fired. And Chief Billy Myrick, the man who claimed that he was proud of the work his officers did that day, yeah, he was also fired. The people involved in this scene claimed that they wanted this operation to put Murphy on the map. And in a way, it did. But just not in the way they intended. And even though this wasn't the end of To Catch a Predator, the show was clearly on its last legs, with the network not wanting a repeat incident and fewer guys showing up at the sting houses. Chris has said that in many interviews that when they started the show, he first thought that no one would show up, that they would have footage of him pacing around the kitchen.
I had no idea when we started that this would still be going on 2.5 years later. I mean, I thought we'd do it once or twice, and we'd get to the point where, you know, we'd have video of me pacing in a kitchen, you know, like the Maytag repairman.
Right, because no one's showing up, right.
Clearly, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Well, by the time the show ended with the Bowling Green sting, I like to imagine that there was plenty of footage just like that. As by the time that sting ended, only 7 men showed up. That's a far cry from the dozens of men they would catch on a regular basis. The show's cancellation also served as a death blow to PJ. They were paid handsomely when working under NBC, but with no income and their reputation already tarnished, things weren't looking good for them. It also didn't help that Xavier Von Erck, PJ's founder, wasn't the most professional guy around. He himself has a history of being extremely petty and hostile when dealing with anyone who dared to criticize or question his methods.
I know you're old and you don't have much life left and you have problems, but when you walk up to me and get in my face and tell me I'm getting in your face, then we have a problem. So I'll be right back. You hold
You're
tight.
touching me, you know.
You spit in my face.
I did.
Yeah, you did. Please keep your dribble to yourself. Be right back.
We'll see what
I'm sure you'll edit it the way you want to edit it. I'm sure you'll do your little thing. And that's why you're a local reporter, not national. That's why you've been in this business. How many years? How many years you've been a reporter?
35.
35. And where do you work?
Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas. And you work for a local affiliate, right?
Correct.
Have you ever asked yourself why you work for a local affiliate, Byron?
Yes.
Yeah.
I worked there because I want to be there.
Oh, you've had all these opportunities to move up and you've turned them down.
No, I actually work for the network.
Oh, you work for them?
I work for ABC.
You work for ABC. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why you're doing the reporting you're doing, aren't you?
And then there's the way he would lambaste anyone who even dared to have an opinion on him or his organization's tactics. How is this a crime? There's no actual minor. Such a stupid statement. If you're reading this and you've uttered this at any point in your life, feel free to smack yourself for ignorance right now. There are no minors involved in what we do. Does this site support violence or harassment against the people you post? No, absolutely not. I cannot put into terms how much we do not support violence against anyone we post here. We do not support vigilantism of that sort. We do not condone it. We condemn it. We are civilized individuals, and you can do more with the power of scorn than you can of fists. Well, funny enough, he didn't answer the part about harassment because that is definitely something they supported, as they would post personal information such as the email addresses of the pervs they caught, even adding a link to send them a message, opening them up to online harassment. And finally, what about critics of the website? What about them? They're dumb. Can't say it more succinct than that, can we? Every organization in the media spotlight has oddballs and crazies out there criticizing them. Hell, even the Red Cross has critics, and they're the Red Cross! In other words, we don't care. Our record speaks for itself. I think there's a reason he was good at playing preteens online. His actual demeanor isn't far off from the fictional kids he was portraying. These responses seem like they were written by an insecure 13-year-old, not a grown man who wants to be taken seriously in the face of the public. They eventually ceased all vigilante operations in 2019. During their heyday, they were making over $800,000 a year from their collaborations with TCAP. But apparently, Von Erck blew all that money on everything except the brand that he helped to build. Their website is still active, although they removed any and all chat logs from their site. I don't know, maybe they did it for legal reasons, but either way, it's nothing but a relic from a bygone era at this point. All I can say is that while most of the PJ team might have had good intentions, Von Erck did nothing less of a spectacular job when it came to mismanaging his organization. As for how Conrad's death affected Chris or his show, well, Chris likes to live in a reality where Conrad's death had no lasting or real consequences on what happened to TCAP. He kind of sees Conrad's unaliving as an occupational hazard.
Ultimately, his sister sued NBC for millions and millions of dollars. The case was settled.
Right.
For a lot of different reasons. A settlement comes out of insurance policy. You go to trial, which I'm confident we would have won. It comes out of the news budget. It ties up months and months of my time. I'm sad for the sister. I truly am.
You know, when you're doing a show, sometimes people flub their lines, sometimes people don't get the right coverage, and sometimes people take their own lives rather than being confronted on national television. And sometimes the network you work for gets sued for over $100 million because of the poor choices of everyone involved. Chris stuck with NBC for a few more years before they booted him. Some say that it was just time for him to go, and others say it was because of a workplace affair he was having. Anyway, ever since then, Chris has been doing everything he can to relive the fame that TCAP brought him. He tried to rebrand with Hansen vs. Predator, but he royally screwed that up by selling the show to Crime Watch Daily, alienating his fans, and for the most part, not fulfilling many of the Kickstarter rewards that were promised. Chris was able to find his groove again with Takedown on True Blue, and while it does have its fans, I am not one of them. I just get the feeling that Chris hates the fact that he's having to ask the same questions and get the same answers from every predator who walks into the Sting house.
Why are you here? Why didn't you just go to Burger King, get your son a Whopper, and head home?
I wish I had.
Now you're here telling me a Whopper of a story. You think it's funny?
I do not. Not a bit.
Even though TCAP and what it built have survived to this day, the story of what happened in Murphy will always be a stain that neither Chris or those involved can ever wash away. In the end, despite all the good the show did and all the monsters they caught, To Catch a Predator's biggest victim was itself. The need to catch as many degenerates as possible sidestepped the procedures that would have seen all those men thrown behind bars for the crimes they committed. And the truth is, what happened in Murphy isn't too far off from what we're seeing on social media today. Take, for example, the butchering of the EDP 445 story. Alex Rosen and his team royally screwed this one up. Watching it for the first time, it felt as if they were more concerned with roasting the guy than they were with actually seeing him face consequences for his actions. And because it didn't follow the proper procedures and go through the right channels, EDP was allowed to walk, and to this day has still not faced justice for what could have been a slam dunk case. Alex, to his credit, has improved his methods and from what I've seen, is actually taking this much more seriously than he was before. And the guys he's catching are actually getting arrested. That's progress right there. Overall, the barrier between justice and entertainment exists for a reason. We want to see justice being served and we want to see these monsters get their due. But everyone kind of has to stay in their own lane. If you step over the line, the monsters you fought so hard to catch can either walk away unscathed, or they can leave this mortal plane before they've ever had a chance to answer for their sins.